Hey guys, Terence here again with another episode of Let's Talk Reef from Neptune Systems. So happy to have you here. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. We've got Ruben During out there, Eddie Solar. Oh man, look at Eddie, man. Eddie was last week's Control Freak Wednesday. Thanks for joining us, Eddie. Corey LaPointe, John Adams, Jeff Bednarik, Braveheart Reefer, Matthew Duarte. We all got you on here, but today is a special episode. We said we'd be doing this once in a while on Let's Talk Reef. We're actually going to take live callers again for Paul and I. You can try to stump Paul later. So if you want to call in and ask a question, you see the number on the bottom of your screen. Call into that, press star, and Paul will sit you into a queue and let you give a question directly to us live on the stream, which not many streams do this, so it takes a little bit of magic on Paul's end to make it all happen. The phone system stuff is really weird, but we're going to have a great show today. The show today is going to be first and foremost about an easy-to-do, do-it-yourself thing that is going to, I think, give you some capability to your Apex that some of you may have been missing. Some of you don't even know that you never had it or that it went away. And it's going to cost you very little money. Maybe it's certainly less than $25 altogether, and pretty easy to implement. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to do a little review on some ways that I use virtual outlets. I'm not as geeky as Paul is, and so I think I'm going to try to put things into my terms for you in the way that I use a couple of virtual outlets, how I created them, and what I use them for, as well, again, as the when statement, because I found kind of a cool way to use a when statement with those virtual outlets. So we're going to talk about that while we wait for a bunch of people to get in here into the stream. But as far as what's going on in the Neptune Systems world, first and foremost, MACNA has been canceled. Oh, this is horrible. We've had delay after delay after delay. I went to one trade show this year, which was Reef Stock, that I attended. We didn't put up a booth there, but I attended Reef Stock, and after that, we've had nothing. Usually there'd be, by now, it would be Reefapalooza. There was supposed to be Interzoo this year, Reefapalooza Orlando. I think by now maybe there was another Aquashella. Can't even remember, but they've all been delayed. MACNA was supposed to be the end of August, but now is put off till next year. Interzoo as well has been put off till next year. And let me remind you guys, now that we got a good group of people here, there is a call-in number on the bottom of the screen. So if you call into that number and press star, if you have a question that you've always wanted to ask, Paul is going to be on the line. He's going to hear about what the question is, put you into our caller queue, and later on in the show, we're going to take those calls live on the air. And Paul may give away some swag to somebody if they have a good enough question. So you definitely want to get in on that. And certainly if any of you guys wanted to ever be on the NSI, the Neptune Systems Insiders Program, there's no better way than to get into our good graces than to come on to a live stream and ask a really smart question. So call into that number, hit the star, and maybe try to stump Paul. Anyway, so yeah, the trade shows have all been kind of put on hold. This when we get out and get to mingle with all of you control freaks. It definitely has me a little bit depressed. MACNA was supposed to be in Phoenix. It's now been delayed till next year. We have the delays of the Reefapaloozas into the fall. And I think one of them, I think maybe the New York one is clear like a week and a half before Christmas. And the Aquashella, I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it's Aquashella Chicago, is on Halloween. Maybe it's the Dallas one. I can't remember. Adam's probably on here, and he's going to correct me. I can't remember which one's which. But everything's going great here at Home Reef with Terence. Those of you that want to know, it's a 425-gallon reef aquarium. You guys always ask. I turned off the wave pumps for this show, and I have to tell you, there's some really cool stuff going on that I don't usually see. All of the bang guys are coming right here to the corner where they would never go because there's just too much flow, and they're grouping together. They're coming around the corner here on me right now. You can kind of see them coming into the frame down there. Right next to that leopard wrasse that's down there. And I tell you what, that's something definitely you should try doing, because you turn off those pumps once in a while, the fish have a completely different demeanor in the tank in the way that they act. Really cool. Anyway, so definitely call the number down below, ask a question, try to stump Paul, and we'll get on. So let's get on right away to some of the other news. We are now our offices in terms of our production are open, so we are building equipment. We aren't caught up yet. We were down for over a month. We are caught up on reagents in a lot of places, so you will find reagents, 2-month reagent kits pretty much in stock just about everywhere, which is really cool because a lot of people were getting a little sketchy on trying to get reagent for their tridents. Definitely had us worried as well. Let's see here. I'm reading some of the comments. Yeah, Reef Automation said, are we getting back into the office? Yeah, I am not back in the office yet because we're not officially there yet, but I think in the coming week, the county will have it for manufacturing back open. But, also it's about keeping people safe. I do have my 82-year-old mother who lives at home with me here, so as long as I can possibly still work at home under this thing until it kind of blows over and whatnot, and also to introduce a little of this into our office. Any of us that can work from home are working from home, if not part-time, full-time. So let's see, there's a couple of questions coming in here. Wow, gosh, this is just so good. You guys, we've got a lot of people in the stream. Ty says, tell us more about my Coral Care lights. Yeah, the tank right behind me is lit up with Coral Care lights. I wonder if I can... Part of the thing I'm going to show you guys today is some of these cool, these different cool virtual outlets that I have. We'll see if I can turn all the lights up to 100% here and even get it a little bit brighter behind me. But yeah, they've been great for me. I've had them for about 3 years. It's a first-generation Coral Care lights. They give a great spread, great color, like everything about them except the fact that they're huge, bulky, and each side of my canopy weighs about 60 pounds with 2 of them in it. They've lightened them up a little bit in the new ones that are supposed to come out, but I think they're still going to be a little bit heavy. Let's see. Oh, are there any plans? Here's Lee Wishnoff says, any plans for 6-month reagents to come out as soon or just the 2-month packages? Until we know that everybody is pretty much caught up, we're going to stick with the 2-month packages, and then we'll be converting over to 6-month packages maybe in a month or so. I think when we start to get our stock in the office back up and we know this COVID thing is kind of behind us a little bit more, we'll definitely we'll definitely start to put the 6 months back on. And we're not leaving them behind. We're not going to stop doing them. It's just we're going to temporarily pause so that we make sure we don't get into a situation where some people don't have reagents. Okay, so I'm what am I going to do if I don't get some callers here? Paul's over there twiddling his thumbs. I can see him on the camera. You guys need to call in, ask Paul a question, especially some of you guys out there. Maybe Mark is on the stream. Mark will call into Paul and ask Paul a question. We'll have Mark Levinson on. And Robert Cray asks, do I run a calcium reactor? Absolutely, I run a calcium reactor on this tank. Let's see. God, the questions are coming in like crazy. Really enjoying the stream here. All right, let's talk about the DIY thing that I'm doing. So first and foremost, the first thing to understand is this particular device is an Apex display screen, right? And this is the little unit that before the Apex even worked to really give you much of a readout, we had this little device to give you a handheld way to interact with your Apex more easily. And at one point, it used to come with your Apex. When we moved to the newer Apex recently, not so recent maybe anymore, that was not part of the included package, but is still available separately. And I happen to have one, and a lot of people happen to have one. The interesting thing about it is that this is not just a display screen. It also is the thing that gives you your audible alerts. So if you saw those 2 outlets in your dashboard, you would be able to see where there's a warning and an alarm outlet or output. And both of those are able to be programmed with a different little tune in them. Never was very loud, but it was somewhat shrill and could get your attention. Certainly in your living room, it would get your attention. My dog, who's not with me anymore, his name was Jiff. Whenever that thing would go off, he was the bigger alert because he hated that thing and would start howling like crazy. But if you don't have one of those, or as David Trong said, his broke. Some people, eat up the wire with a vacuum cleaner, and some people then don't replace it. Whatever the reason, maybe you're just running only off of a tablet, and you want to get some sort of an audio indication when something is going wrong. How do you do it? Well, one of the nice things about the new Apex with the energy bar, let's see if I got one right over here, is that it has these outlets on it. Let's see if I can get to the right spot. Right there are the outlets for, there's two of them, for 24 volt, right? They're 2-pin little outlets. And they're switchable, just like the outlets on the front side. That's why it's called the Energy Bar 832. There's 8 switchable 120-volt outlets, AC outlets on the front. There's 3 one-link connections, which can power and control any of the Neptune devices with a one-link connection. And then there's these DC 24 connections, which power things, for instance, like our PMUP or solenoid valve, or you can also use them for other 24-volt devices that you may come upon and wire them up. So I thought to myself, why don't we make an alarm that you can put on your Apex? Now, I've seen lots of different things, sound makers and different things. None of them were very cool. And then I came upon the coolest panel solution for this. I'm going to show you a video here. The reason it's so cool is if you guys watched the previous episode, you saw I'm redoing my Apex board downstairs. You know, a lot of people have these mounting boards, and they want things to look really cool on the board, right? And when I found this, I just thought it was the best ever. Let me put this on. It's going to be kind of annoying at first, but you'll get the picture here. So there's the alarm beeping away. That's the little device, and you're all saying, please turn that off. Please turn it off now. So there is that little alarm device that I installed, and I'm going to tell you guys how I did it, how I programmed it up, and what you need to get one yourself. First of all, you would need to get the little alarm device, and here's one that I have right here. So you can see it. Whoop, it's out of focus. Right there. And this is where you can get them, okay? So they are on Amazon. And you can see right there how inexpensive they are. I mean, I couldn't believe. I mean, I got 3 of them basically for $8. I don't remember if I had to pay shipping on these or not. Maybe it was $3 for shipping or something. I can't remember. But they really are a lot nicer than I even expected them to be. It's got a nice kind of like textured matte finish. It has this removable little front here. I don't know why you'd want to remove the front of it, so you can get to the little alarm inside. See that, and then on the back you basically use a drill that I used, a hole saw that was I think it was like 9/16, something like that. If I put this back together, and then on the back you'll see that there are 2 terminals on the back, right there. And the interesting part is that it doesn't even matter which wire you hook up to which, because it'll work AC, DC, either direction. So either way it works. I don't need to be technical. It just worked. And so I'm going to tell you how to do that. So first you have to buy those. Okay. Jason Martin says it's 22 millimeter. Okay. Good. Awesome. That's why we do a live stream, because then I have people are going to tell me which way it is. And Bill Ludwig says, oh my gosh, that's annoying. LOL. Well, exactly. If you had water on the floor, boy, you'd want to know that, wouldn't you? And if you get 3 of them, you could program them differently, like I'm going to show you here in a minute. Reef and Chill says, headphone users rest in peace. Yeah, definitely it's loud. So you put these on the panel by unscrewing this, and you put it through the panel, and then you screw this thing back on. It's really simple. And you got 3 of them. Maybe you can share that expensive cost with the other reef keepers. All right, what else do you need to make this work? Well, the next thing that you need, let's get that up there, is that you need one of these cables. So this is a DC 24 volt DC cable. Okay, it comes with a, I don't know if it's maybe it's 4 meters of wire. It's a long wire, so you get a lot of wire with it. And it's got 2 already pre-tinned wires on the end. And all you need to do when you get it is just take one of those wires, unscrew with your little handy dandy, I like to use an orange screwdriver, of course. And you unscrew that, and then you put this under the tab, you screw it down, and away you go. It's really important, though, that you put it through the panel first before you put that on, or put it on and make sure, I guess the hole would be big enough to go on there to do that. But anyway, you you screw it together like that. If you want to get another close-up look, you can kind of get business end of the cable. There it is. And hopefully your local fish store will be carrying that. By the way, guys, we are still taking calls. I only have one person lined up. That means he's one of one to get some free swag. So definitely cool. It looks like we got Lucas on hold here. So you guys call in. Give us some help. Let's take some calls. Why would we do this thing if you're not going to call in? What are you shy about? I can tell you one thing. You guys are not shy on Facebook. So when you're keyboard warrioring it, boy, you've got all kinds of things to say, all kinds of questions. So let's get you on the live call here and let everybody hear you. Okay. So next up, what do we do after we plug it in? Well, obviously, after you connect it, you're going to plug it into one of these two outlets, and you're going to have to find that outlet in your dashboard and then program up that outlet. So let's take a look at that for a second. I'm going to switch over to the. Oh, perfect! It worked. Look at that. Excellent. Maybe you guys want to see me a little bit bigger. Maybe not. All right, so there's the apex look, right? Jeff says, well, you can mount switches in it that you can wire in series to override it. Very good idea, right? So if it's going off and you don't want to have to try to reach for your phone to turn it off in the apex, then you can just hit a switch and it'll automatically go off. So if you notice, I have another outlet here that I have called alarm right here on the... Oh, you can't see my cursor up there. Okay, so it's right on the top here. It's called, there we go. It's called alarm. And that particular output or outlet, you'll see, says 24-volt DC accessory output A on the energy bar 832. So you have to find that, right? How do you find that usually? Usually it'll be, if it's not already on your dashboard somewhere, you just have to click here, and you'll find it on this list. Or if you are a pro and you like looking at this screen, you can pull open here, go here, and look through all of these until you find the 832 that you think you have it plugged into, and then you can find it in here, and there you go. Because you can see here's one right here. See how this one is different color? That means that those are the 24-volt ones. So that's my freshwater in solenoid goes into my water holding that I told you guys about before, and that's my heat exchanger. So anyway, so that's how you can find the output or outlet. And after you do that, now you're going to want to configure it. Now, it'd be very easy just to put only the statements for the things that you want to cause an alarm to happen in that outlet, right? Like, hey, if my temperature is above 80 degrees, then on, okay? But what I wanted to do and what I wanted to show you guys is something a lot cooler, okay, which is I often have things that are emergencies now, and I have other things which I just kind of want to be reminded of. They're things that are a problem, things that need to be tended to. You know, my ATO, for whatever reason, has stopped because the when statement kicked off, or things of this nature. And I don't want them to be blasting an alarm out, but I do want to kind of know about it, let's say every 30 minutes or every hour, so I want to get like a little beep reminder. So that's what I'm going to show you guys is 2 ways to do this, right? The one way is a simple way. I'm going to do it a little bit more complicated way that's going to give you more functionality. So we have the alarm here, and you'll see in here I've got, well, let me go back. I'm going to go back because I don't want to show you that yet. So if you can imagine, I've created 2 virtual outlets here. One I've called reminder and one I've called siren. Let's go back and talk about for a second here what a virtual outlet is. It's an outlet that is not a physical outlet, right? It is something that is used solely for the purpose of functionality and programming. And you create those by going to the gear, and from the gear, you go to the outlet-looking thing. And from here, first of all, you'll notice here that under type, you'll see all of these virtual outlets, right? Here's all these virtual outlets. So I already have a bunch. But if you go up to this gear now at the top, you can see add virtual outlet. And then you just give it a name. And once you give it a name, now you have that virtual outlet. And you can create a whole bunch of these if you want. So I'm not going to create another one now, but that's what I did to create the one called reminder and the one called siren, which you can imagine the siren is the one that you guys heard that made your ears bleed. So these 2 virtual outlets are where I put the conditions that I want for each of these types of alerts. So in the case of the siren, if my temperature in my fish cave for the tank is greater than 81, I want that siren going off. If my pH is below 7.7, I want the siren going off. If my alkalinity is less than 7, I want the siren to go off. These are critical things that can happen, and I want the siren to go off. Now, I just started configuring this today, so there's other things I'm going to add and other ways I'm going to adjust this. But there's an example of the conditions for the siren. Now, this particular output doesn't do anything on its own. It has to be linked in to the actual output that is controlling that siren, which is on the Energy Bar 832, the one I've called alarm. So now if I go back to my dashboard, you'll see the other one, which was the reminder, which is right here. And under reminder, you see, look, if my pH is less than 8.2, then I want it to be on. I just put this in here so I could do some testing today, but you could put whatever kinds of lower level alerts that you would want to have in here, okay? So you put those in here. Now, how does it all come together? Well, we have to have the programming itself in the alarm outlet. This is the one that actually does control directly that little siren. So in here, we've got some of the similar things that you've seen before, which is I want to start off by making the outlet off. Now, one of the key things to remember is that all of these statements in any kind of the Apex configuration, programming, whatever you want to call it, they all get read sequentially, and the last one that is true is the one that gets used. So first of all, it turns this outlet off, right? That's now the current state, it's off. And if it couldn't talk with the Apex, it turns it off, right? And then this is what's called the oscillating statement. And this basically turns something off and on a certain frequency, okay? Now, look, we don't need to get into all of it because it's really quite confusing for me too. But what I like to remember to do is I try to think of how long do I want something to be on for, and then what do I want the total amount of cycle time to be? And those two things should add up. The total of my two numbers here should add up to what that total cycle time is. So an example here is, don't worry about the first one at all, okay? The second one is how long it's going to be on for, okay? So it's going to be on for 2 seconds. And then the last one says, now it's going to be off for this long, okay, which is 29 minutes and 28 seconds. So what this says is that this particular outlet is going to be on for 2 seconds, and then in 30 seconds, more or less, it's going to come on again for two seconds, okay? And I'm loving the fact that I'm getting all these comments here. I wish I could read all of your comments through here, but guess what? Paul is going to be reading those as they come through while he's also taking calls here, and we'll have a discussion about this in a few minutes because I'm sure I'm getting some of this wrong, or I'm sure there's something that Paul is going to make better, but I'm trying to give you the basic guys. Look, hey, I'm not the super programmer of this stuff, and I can still do it. And even if you don't completely understand all of this, you can cookie cut this right out of this video and use it, and it'll work for you. So that's what the oscillate statement does. So every 30 seconds, more or less, or 29 minutes and 28 seconds, the siren's going to go off for 2 minutes, okay? Now, the next things are how it uses those other two virtual outlets, right? The ones where we put the actual conditions or the statements that we want to decide whether or not a siren's going to go off or a reminder's going to go off. Now, you notice that the siren is more or less always, once we get to the statement, coming on, right? But if you look here, if the reminder was off, in other words, there is no condition in that other virtual outlet that would mean it was actually creating a reminder, then it's going to turn it off. So it just totally ignores that last statement. And then the last statement here says if the output siren equals on, so if one of those conditions in the siren outlet, okay, were to be made true, then it turns it on. And it's just going continuously, what you guys heard and was making your ears bleed. Now, that's basically it. That's all you need. But if you wanted to take this one step further, and I'll give this the credit to Joe on our development team for this, you may not want to get the reminders through the middle of the night. You may want to get sirens, but not reminders. So you can put an if time in here. So you could say if time, I don't know when you go to bed, but let's call it 2200 to 0600, then off. Now, what that means is you won't get any of the reminders, right, when it's that time of the night, and so you don't get woken up, your wife or your husband doesn't get woken up just because there's something that you really can take care of in the next day. So anyway, that's how this little siren works. It's just a couple of virtual outlets, a wire that you can purchase from your local fish store, hopefully, or online if you can't find it at your local fish store. And these couple of virtual outlets and a little screwdriver and 2 screws, and you're good to go. And you've got a new audible alert all set up and ready to go for you. So we'll talk about some questions on that in a little bit. Okay. I'm going to talk about a couple of other virtual outlets that I have here while Paul is taking calls, because I've found a way to use some of these virtual outlets in a way that, look, sometimes it takes me a long time to really figure out what some of these weird commands do. You know, the guys tell me, oh, we got this new thing. It's a when, and it does this, and it does that. And then I'm like, yeah, that's nice, okay? And then eventually I find the use for it for myself that makes me understand what it's for. So let me show you a couple of those. One of the things that many of us like to do, is we like to take pictures of our tank, right? And in taking pictures of our tank, we often want it in a certain color, and we want the pumps to be off like I have here, and certain conditions. Or maybe we are having a party, and we want to turn on all the lights on the tank a certain way. There's certain ways that we want to do that, and to do that, we often use a virtual outlet again. So let me demonstrate to you a couple of ways that that works, and the new way that I found that it works. And some of this is probably repetitive, and certainly for some of you pros out there, okay? First of all, the most common way is what I have here in this filming night. This is, again, a virtual outlet, remember. It doesn't really do anything at all on its own. All it's there for is so something else can reference it, okay? So in this case, I've called it filming night, and it's off, and it's made for me to turn it on when I want to film at night. So how does it make something else happen? Well, it doesn't do it directly. That something else looks at that to decide what it should do. So in this case, I'm going to show you just a few of the outlets here that are using these. In this case, the lighting, right? So this is how it is done mostly. This is before the new cool way that I'm going to show you. So in this case, I've got my blue and white channels for my coral care, on the left side, and I've got my Reef Bright strip on the left side here. And so I'm going to go ahead and look at the code for that. So first of all, you see this is the pattern of intensity throughout the day for it, but that's not what we care about. Up here in this corner here is where you can go and add other kind of advanced bonus stuff, right? So you click on that. It's also where you can change the name of that particular outlet. And all this T-data stuff, that's the actual code that comes from that pretty little graph that you just saw. So at the end of all of that, now you can put in other pieces of code. And you'll notice here, I've got the filming night, okay? And it says if output filming night equals on, then 20p. Now, I'm not going to get all into the detail of how that works, but the 20p is actually a profile for 20%. So it takes and turns my blues to 20% when filming night is on, because I've manually switched it to on. And that's how it sees that. Now, also the same way, if I've basically selected the virtual outlet called just blue, and that one happens to be on, well, then it turns it to on, which is 100%. Now, again, if we go back here, you'll see that in order for me to make this happen, what I end up having to do is move it to the on state here. But it's very common, at least for me, that I'm going to leave that in the on state because I forget. Okay, so that's often a problem, especially if you have a virtual outlet that's not just doing lights. You notice it changed the lights over here. That's why they're changing behind me. But you know, I'll forget and leave it like that, and guess what? It's not going to go off at night either, right? Because it's in that mode, and it's superseding everything else. So what do you do in those cases? Again, how about a party, right? So you're going to have a party. Maybe you have a couple of drinks, right? And you know you turn the lights on before the party starts, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna have the party. It's 2 in the morning. It's time to go to bed. You just crash. You completely forget about the aquarium, and the lights are on all night, right? Well, there's a way to deal with all of this, and let me show you how that's done. So in this next one where I call just blue, okay, you'll notice that I'm basically have it set on, What this means is when it's running in the auto mode, it's just going to be on, okay? But if it's left there and it's greater than 60 minutes, it's going to turn off. So if I go and just decide, hey, I'm looking with a couple of buddies, I want to look at the tank as blue, and then we get distracted and go start talking about motorcycles, in 60 minutes, it's going to go back to off. Now, one of the critical differences here between these two virtual outlets is this one gets turned on in the on state, right? And it could be going to auto also if I wanted to, but this one, I basically have to put it in the auto mode. If I put it into on mode, that when statement won't work, okay? Now, that's one thing I've used it for. Another one that I've used it for is, if you notice here, if I want to fill my saltwater tank, how many of you have a pump, and maybe the pump doesn't have an auto-off feature like the new PMUP does, and you're worried about burning the pump up? So you really only want to run that transfer pump maybe 30 minutes. Well, again, you turn it to auto, and you notice that this is the virtual outlet, okay? And the virtual outlet has a 30-minute timer basically in it. And if you look at the actual pump, the pump is plugged into one of these 24-volt accessories, and you'll see it's referencing that particular virtual outlet. That's how it knows to come on or off. So you wouldn't want to turn on or off your transfer pump, even though you could manually do that, because you'd forget. But if you turned it on to auto here with the fill saltwater tank, boy, now it's only going to go for maximum 30 minutes. Last example I'm going to show you. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of us control freaks like to use the Apex for other reasons. I think Mark Levinson, who's on here, actually said that he uses it for his Christmas lights, and I know other people do that as well. Well, I use my Apex, since it's downstairs anyway in the fish cave, I use it for my back landscape lighting. So I have a couple of 24-volt landscape lights setups, power supplies. They plug into the Apex, and I've got one here called Shrubs and one called Paths. It's really simple to do. Because it's in my backyard, I don't have them on light timers or a photocell because there's not really any reason to. It just eats up energy, and nobody's back there anyway. So the only time I ever use it is to manually turn it on, at least for now. So again, I've got an outlet here, a virtual outlet called Landscape. You'll notice here, it's set on. When on is greater than 90 minutes, then it turns it off. And both of these separate power supplies here, Shrubs and Paths, both reference that. You can see if output landscape equals on, then on. So virtual outlets and the when command can be super helpful for you to be able to have stuff that you don't want to forget and leave on, or leave it off, either way. You could use it for maintenance modes. You could use it for all kinds of different things. This is what I've used it for so far: photo mode, filming nights, all of these kinds of things. I hope that that was all correct. I'm going to get corrected in a little bit if it's not. I know we've got some callers in here now. We've got at least 4 or 5. Hopefully they're still all on the line in the waiting queue. Let me check a couple of questions here before I kick it over and bring Paul in and we start talking questions here. Okay. I think this is all good stuff. All good stuff. Maybe Paul's got a couple of these that he's noted down too. Is there an OSC calculator somewhere? Eddie, man, this is Eddie. I'm totally with you, man. This is the most confusing command in all of Apex, okay? And it's funny because it is so crystal clear to the geekiest of geeks. So I'm totally with you. It took me forever to kind of even somewhat understand how this thing works. When people are like, it starts at midnight, and then it do this, and then you do that. It's like, I hope the way I showed it was able to get it across to you guys. All right, let's go back here. So, last call for alcohol on the call-ins, you guys. Hopefully, you guys can call in, give Paul the topic you want to talk about. We're going to bring Paul in here in a minute. What else did I want to tell you? Oh, last thing, just let's review one more time. So if you want to get that siren, it is out on Amazon, at least until all you guys buy them up, because you guys are probably out there buying them up right now, if I know you guys. They're like about $3 a pop. They're really handy. They're super loud. If you set it up as a reminder, as I did for 2 seconds, it's just going to go beep, beep, like that, and then that's it. And then 30 minutes later or an hour or whatever you set it for, you will need one of these cables. This is the DC24 cable, and you can get that from either your online supplier or from your local fish store, whichever you have. I will say it's probably a little less available at your local fish store because it's not a super common thing to have. Also, one thing really cool about it, if you do have a 24-volt fan, now realize if you put a 12-volt anything on this, you could poof it, right? So make sure it's a 24-volt DC device. But if you have a 24-volt DC device and you want to plug it into it, you get this cable. You can do a lot of different things, but the one thing to be sure of is that it's not a high current device. What do I mean by that? It should be around 30 watts or less, okay? It's very important to note also that the total amount of everything that you have between the one links and these DC 24s should not exceed 100 watts while they are on. If all of the things could be on and at 100% at the same time and it equaled more than 100 watts, that would be bad, okay? So just keep that in mind when you're deciding what you're going to plug in. Any one of those DC 24 ports, I believe they're rated to 35. Call it safe, call it 30, and you should be good. All right, let me see now if I can do this right. I can pull this in. We'll get Paul on the line. Okay, I got Paul visibly there. Okay, Paul, can I hear you, Paul? Are you out there, Paul? Oh, I don't hear Paul. So Paul is muted right now for some reason. Don't know why. I got him on my phone here. Interesting. Interesting. Paul, do we have you out there? Okay, Paul. I had you before the thing started. I can hear you on my computer. Okay, let's hear you now. Can I hear you now, Paul? Nope, you're not coming through, buddy. I think it's on your end. I'm hearing you coming through the phone, but I'm not hearing you come through there. Very interesting. Hang on, let me make sure we've got the... oh, we're not on the Bluetooth anymore. Hang on. That's why. Somehow or another, the Bluetooth got disconnected. You guys just hang in with me. You know what? This is live TV. Not live PD. I love live PD, by the way. For some reason, we lost the connection to Roadcaster. It looks like we have it now. Looks like we're good. Huh. How about now, Paul? No? Yeah, it's like I hear you, but I don't hear you. Hang on. I'm going to try it this way. How about now? Oh, wait a sec. Let me try this. He's so funny. This is a technical... I think I'm going to have you now. Let's hear you now. Paul?
Oh, Terence, I can hear
you. Somehow or another.
So much.
It was all working.
Much excitement.
It was all working. And
we'd eventually get there, right?
Oh my goodness, man. It was all working before we started, and some reason or another it went off the Bluetooth. Because people don't understand there's tons of machinations. How you doing, Paul?
I'm great, Terence. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going to shrink your head a little bit here, man. Let's get you in the middle.
Am I a little too close?
No, you're good. Everything's good now. Everything's good. Still no aquarium behind you, buddy. You need to draw one or something.
No, it's here. It's here. Hold on. It's here.
There we go.
All right, can you see it now? I am at Neptune Systems, so getting some of the day-to-day things done. I come in 2 or 3 times a week and try to be home as much as possible. But there's some things that I am doing at the office these days. So
slowly coming back. Everybody is slowly coming back to work. So
we're just being really safe, making sure everyone has a lot of space in between them. And if you don't need to be here like you, we don't want you here.
Thank you. No kidding, right? So did I get all that stuff okay? Did I go through it slow enough?
You did really good. I mean, I thought that was interesting that you needed something for you for the win statement to kind of click, right? The effectiveness of it, right? I'm applying it to the auto top-off kits, and for what a lot of us are doing with that, wasn't necessarily the aha moment for you, but it was something a little bit, something a little bit off in the fringe that actually got it to click for you.
Yeah, so I thought that would be helpful for some people. Hopefully it is.
Mm-hmm.
So do we get any good questions?
Definitely. We did, and it was great that several of the questions that came in today were all related to DC 24-volt outputs.
That's awesome.
And it was before you kind of even got started, right? So our first caller is Lucas. I'm going to go pop off the line for a second and pick up Lucas, and we will bring him in here, okay?
I might hear some Janet Jackson.
Yeah, you might. Hold on here, okay? Right. Now I got to remember what I got to do here. So.
Yeah, if you guys get Janet Jackson, when you call into our hold music, this is what you get, Control. It's all about control. Yeah. So Paul's bringing in the caller right now with our high-tech phone system. All right.
All right. Terrence, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we got Lucas on the line.
Hey, Lucas, man, how you doing?
How you doing, Terrence? How you doing, Paul? I'm doing pretty good. I'm about to I'm out of outlets on my Energy Bar 832.
Okay.
To use the 24-volt output to go to a relay to control a 120-volt outlet. And I want to see what you guys have to say about that.
So, Terrence, do you understand that question?
Yeah, I absolutely understand the question, and I think it's I think it's definitely a use that is valid. I don't see any problem with it. Clearly, you do have to be careful. Obviously, I mean, if it was a big chunkin', contactor relay type thing with a lot of current draw, then you'd want to look at that, right? But probably what you're trying to do is not that, and you could you could feasibly add another outlet. Now, what I will say on that is, for caution for everybody else, this is kind of a pro level thing. If you're trying to roll your own here, you're dealing with saltwater, high voltage electricity, and a lot of potential for problems. So you want to be careful with that. But that said, there are commercial versions of these that are all sealed and ready to go that you could use. Most people would probably
they're expensive.
Yeah, most people would be better off, in my opinion, to buy something like that or buy another 832. The reason that this might be a great solution for somebody who wants to run a higher current device that they can't plug into an 832, that they could then plug the relay, the contacts, the activation contacts onto the 832 into this DC 24 port, and then hook that high current device into there. What do you think, Paul?
Like a large pump.
Yeah, exactly.
240-volt pump, I'd imagine.
Yes. So, Lucas, it was a great question, right? And so, first off, just a couple things to know about the DC 24-volt output. It can handle about 20 to 30 watts total, right? So it is not designed to, drive large devices or anything like that. Okay. What it can be also used for is what you can imagine. And what Lucas is talking about is a device in which you bring in a 110 volt power, right? And then the 24 volt is actually what sort of completes the circuit. So that 24 volt going on and off actually brings in the 110 volt power. You could also do this with a 220 volt line if you needed to as well. The thing that I would caution is exactly what Terrence cautioned there is if you don't know what you're doing, it is great to bring in a certified electrician for something like this. And this is great for 240 volt options or those 1 horsepower chillers, those sorts of things. This can be a really good solution, but there are off the shelf things. You want to look in the horticultural, greenhouse kind of stuff. They have these things, both 110 volt versions of them, where it's a 220 volt power, but a 110 volt trigger. And then they also have 220 volt power with a 24 volt or a 12 volt trigger.
Yeah, they got to pick the normally open and normally closed as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yep.
For sure.
So,
well, that's a great question.
But that's a great way to utilize the 24 volt output. And I love your question because before Terrence even got into anything today, you kind of kicked it off, and I like that.
Excellent.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Lucas.
Do you have any other questions? Cool. See you, Lucas. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
All right.
All right. That was a
Definitely
great
good.
question, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was a great question. Well, there's lots of questions coming in. I can't even keep track of all of the ones on the stream.
Yeah. No, it's going really fast. So Terrence, are you looking at the call-in sheet?
Yeah. So let's see here. Let's go to Elmer because I don't even know what that means. Let's go to Elmer.
Elmer wants to know how to start. I didn't know either, so that's why I had some follow-up questions for Elmer. But I figured
let's let him explain what he means.
Yeah, exactly. So let me find him real quick. All right, I'll be popping out, and I'll be back in a second. All right.
Okay, we're gonna hear some more control.
Oh yeah.
Well, we could hear that, or we could hear something else too. You know, I could definitely. Oh, there's no. Oh, we don't get control anymore, guys. So, bring in my own music while we wait for Paul. So we're going to have Elmer coming on here. He's going to talk about how to start. Okay. How's it going, guys? Elmer, you out there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, how's it going? Where are you calling in from, Elmer?
Chanute, Kansas. Little small town in the southeast corner.
Chanute, Kansas.
All right, sorry guys. I got kicked off. Sorry,
okay.
But I'm back.
Excellent.
You guys all there?
Yeah, we're here. I got Elmer here.
All
He's from Chanute, Kansas. Hey, Elmer, how close is that? The only thing I know in Kansas, Elmer, is the largest ball of twine. Isn't that in Kansas? You don't know.
I honestly have no clue about that.
Oh, my gosh.
The only thing I know about in Kansas is our platinum reseller. They're in Omaha. They're at Fish Freak.
Omaha, that's Nebraska.
Michael Bonovitt.
That's Nebraska.
Yeah,
not Kansas.
Isn't he calling from Nebraska?
He said he was calling from
Nebraska.
He said he was calling from Chanute, Kansas. Isn't that right, Elmer?
That's close.
Yeah, Nebraska's about 2 hours away. All my local fish stores are about 2 hours away.
Oh, man, dude. That's rough.
So how about Cessna?
I've
been to the Cessna plant. Are you near the Cessna plant?
Okay. Yeah, there's a Cessna about 45 minutes away.
There you go. So at least I have something in common. There we go. Good. So Elmer, I saw your question here. Why don't you repeat your question for everybody?
All right. I have a lot of switches that I don't use on my Fusion dashboard, and I have no idea how to take them off.
Okay, I'm going to show you that right
Elmer.
now, okay? Because I have the power, okay? So let's put us like that. I lost Paul, but that's okay because I'm just going to show you this real quickly here. Basically, on your dashboard, you hit the little lock in the upper right corner, and then everything will jiggle, kind of like your iPhone does. And then next to every single one of those outlets, there's an X. And if you click on that X, they go back into the tray where you can then pull them down and use them again later, okay? So you just go down and click off all of those X's, and every one of them will disappear.
All right. I made it that far, but for some reason I have two of them for my auto top off, and they both run the same auto top off.
Okay.
I can't.
I
don't know
exactly
how to delete the one, so I could only use one.
So maybe you have two different outlets that are named the same, possibly, Paul?
Right. So if you have two outlets that are in the same, and so you just don't see open or close, but you see that off, auto, and on, that means you have two outlets of the same, which is not a good thing, right? There's no way you'd ever be able to determine that, okay? But it's great because you can also, when you click on one of the outlets, you can also see something that says location. Okay, and my guess is that you probably have. Do you have the Neptune Systems Auto Top Off Kit, the ATK?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my guess is here that you have the power supply plugged into the EB832, and you name that Auto Top Off, right? And but that's not actually your Auto Top Off. That's your Auto Top Off power supply. Okay, and then you have another outlet that is your PMUP. Right, and that is actually your 24-volt output on your FMM module. Okay, and my guess would be that is probably what's going on there. To kind of, I think I missed a little bit on what you were saying there earlier too. But if you did want to start all over, but you didn't want to necessarily lose your Apex's configuration, you could do that. And the way that you would do that, Elmer, is you can delete your Apex from Apex Fusion and add it back in again. Then it comes back with a default dashboard. Okay. And the other option for you is you could just reset your Apex to factory settings if you just want to start over fresh. And to do that, you hold the reset button on the Apex for 20 seconds until the status light turns red.
All right.
Okay. And I think that probably kind of answers some of your questions. I think a lot of times on your dashboard it gets really confusing, but if you're ever confused, just click on the gear button. It'll say location, right? And it will say it's the 24-volt accessory output on your FMM module. It's your outlet number 3 on your EB832, any of those things.
Awesome. Thanks.
I hope that helps
Great,
out,
Elmer.
Elmer.
Thank you for calling in, Elmer. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go to Harry Singer. Good old Harry Singer.
You want to pull in old Harry, huh?
Yes.
All right. I will pop off, and I will
Hang
be
on, while
back
you're
here
doing
in a
that,
second.
okay, I'll tell this. Wally Reef says, how do you call in? Basically, there is a number right here on the screen. Waleed, there you go. There's the number on the screen, 408-275-2205. Press star. Obviously, if you're watching this recorded later on, we're not going to be able to put you on. But if you're calling right now, definitely can. Right now, we're listening to Control by Janet Jackson. It's our choice when we have hold music, for obvious reasons. So we're waiting for Paul to come back on here. He's going to bring another caller on. He might have dumped a few people. Looks like we got Steve Berlin also just rolled into the house here from Siche. Okay, Paul, who do we got on the line?
We've got Mr. Harry Singer from Florida.
Harry, you out there?
So,
Yes, sir.
Oh my gosh, Harry, the one, the legend, the 3D printing god of Apex gear. He is on the call. No more just text. No more just typing stuff in on Facebook. We actually hear Harry Singer's voice for the first time in public on the stream. Harry, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm glad you are so honored. I feel it.
All right. Well, thank you for calling in and helping it make a show out of this. Hey, maybe down the road I'm going to have one of your little switch things. I'll put it up on that control board down there, and give you some more props for that. And for those of you that don't know, Harry basically was the one involved in the BRS special edition. He constructed all of the float switch assemblies for us for that special project. So kudos to Harry for doing that. So Harry, what's your question?
Okay, so my question was regarding the 24-volt port. So I have a 300-gallon tank that has, I think, 3 EB832s, and I'm controlling some fans both in the stand and in the canopy with the 24-volt power. Okay.
Okay.
So I was
following
wondering. So is there any issue with the amount of times the fan turn on and off per day, or the 24-volt port is activated per day? Because I know some of the EB8 outlets, they have a lifespan, but I wanted to control the 24-volt port based on temperature.
Right.
Turn on the fans when it's warm. So would there be any limitation with how many times per day that's used, or it doesn't really matter?
Okay, so first of all, those 832 ports are controlled with relays, different relay than the ones that control the 120 volt ports. But one thing to note about relays in general is their lifespan is basically determined on a couple of different things. Number one is, yes, how many times you turn it off and on. And number two, the amount of current that you're drawing through that relay. And the reason for that has to do with the contacts on the relay are where things generally go bad. Okay, so I wish I had a diagram for a relay here to show you guys, but it's basically a switch, just like a light switch on your wall. And it's automated with a magnet. an electromagnet. So if you can imagine you're turning off and on the switch on your wall all day long, okay, eventually you're going to wear out the switch in your wall. It will. Now, if you were doing that all day long and it was a very low power LED light, you might have to do that until you probably croak, maybe before you would wear it out. However, if on the other hand you had a very large 3 horsepower 120 volt pump and you were switching that off and on every time those contacts come together, they arc right before they make contact, right? And it burns up a little bit of those contacts. And so when you have something that has a lot of current going through it, it wears out faster than something that's less, okay? So back to your original question, can you wear those out? The answer is yes, they can be worn out because every relay can be worn out. Will they wear out for you? It really comes. I don't know what the rating is off the top of my head, so I can't tell you that. But I can tell you it's definitely in the many, many, many tens of thousands of cycles. And so the likelihood that turning on and off a low current fan is going to wear that out during the day, I find doubtful.
Okay, that's good to know. And also, I guess you can always throw in like a defer statement so it doesn't go back and forth.
Well, that's
as often.
absolutely
Right.
Absolutely something you want to do, right? So
that's what I was going to jump in there with Terence.
Oh, I thought you were taking another phone call there, Paul.
No, my headset died. They only last
thought you
for
had
so
taken
long.
an emergency call.
No, this is legit. I think that it's just to add there, Harry, is in terms of what you're trying to do, right? You would definitely want to make sure that you have either a min statement, right, a min time statement, and with the ATK, for example, we use min time 60 minutes then off, and that only allows the auto top off pump to run once an hour. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you shouldn't have that fan like turning on and off, on and off, on and off. Right. Especially if, your on temperature is very close to your off temperature. Right. You want to have it turn on, cool it off, and then let it heat back up again and then cool it off. Right. So defer and min times would both be great suggestions there on how to handle that.
We did have another question
great.
follow up here on your question from Matthew Duarte, who said, "What is the MTBF, mean time before failure, for the non-electrical folks?" It does not work that way. It really is a matter of cycles. So every relay has a certain number of cycles at a certain number of at a certain amount of current that it's actually switching on and off. I don't have that number straightforward for you guys right here. Maybe you can write into support or something. But I think the best thing to tell you is it's probably not going to be anything you have to worry about if you're running it at the current rates that you should be running it, and you're not switching it on and off 5 times a minute.
Yeah, the thing that really adds the life cycle on those is the on off, and multiple times a minute to multiple times a 10-minute, 15-minute period. Those things can kind of wear them out, and that's when the EB8 really is great because it has the soft start outlets which can turn on and off many, 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 many times.
But on a fan, most people aren't going to be, you're going to have it come on and
off.
On a fan example,
it doesn't really apply, right? So. Anyways,
great
question, Harry. Great question.
All right. Let's see.
Thank you so much. That makes
sense. Take care, Harry.
You too.
Let's take one more. How about that?
One more.
What are you looking at? Let's take Michael's call.
Okay. Let me see if he's still on though, Terence.
If he's not, we can take Chris.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So I will hop out. I'll hop back in, guys. Just give me a second.
Know how much
all right?
you'd want to take Chris's call.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, here we go again. Hey, we'll take musical requests for the hold music, from you guys for sure. But Paul is going to line up Michael here, who has a question, I think, about feed cycles. So everybody wants to know how to use the feed cycle, so we'll find out. We got Matt Dudley with a great tank over in Florida. He's on the line. Good to see you here, man. And obviously the Reef Automation guy is here.
All right, I got Michael here with feed cycle questions.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, how's it going?
So where are you calling from, Michael?
Los Angeles, California.
Whereabouts, man? Because I'm in L.A., born and bred.
Nice.
Where are you from?
I'm in Inglewood,
Inglewood,
I'm
sweet.
from Culver City, but living in Inglewood right now.
The donuts, the donut capital, man. I love what's the name of the donut place there with the big giant donut? Oh, right across from the Forum.
Is it Randy's or something?
Yeah, Randy's Donuts, man.
Yeah.
Love that place. Love that place. They're doing a ton of construction there with the whole new complex they're putting in right there for the big stadium, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's got to be crazy. It's got to be crazy. I saw it from the air, and I'm like, they left the Forum. How nice of them.
I think the Clippers are taking the Forum now.
Yeah. I saw the Beastie Boys in 1998 at the Forum. That was pretty sweet.
Oh,
So,
wow. That must have been great.
dude, it was rocking. So, okay, feed cycle question. What's your question specifically?
So, I went to the miscellaneous setup and I found that you could set intervals for feed cycle A, B, C, D in different times per second. But when I selected the return pump would only turn off for the first one, and it looked like you can only choose one out of the 4. I was wondering if there was a way to set that to be able to work with all 4 different time intervals.
You understand the question, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. It's completely. So you've got these different feed cycles set up, and those feed cycles can be used for like a short feed or a long feed, maybe for maintenance. All the different ways. But then by default, the wizards only kind of set up one feed cycle that you can choose from: A, B, C, or D, right?
Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to make sure that it operates off of more than one feed cycle. So are you running a core, or are you running just an on-off return pump?
It's an on-off return pump currently.
Nope. Great. So all you would do, Michael, is you would go to the outlet, right, for the return pump power. Okay, you're in the configuration there, and then the control type right now is set up for return pump. Okay, you just switch it over to control type advanced, and in that you're going to see at the very bottom of that outlet, it says if feed A, right, 000, then off. Right. Then to add another one, guess what? You just push enter, copy and paste, feed that line and paste it on again, and then just change the A to a B.
Oh, perfect.
And now you have A, B, and then if you want to add C and D, you can do as many different outlets as you want.
Up to 4.
On a core, it would be fairly similar. You would just click on the gear for the core configuration when you're there, and you go over to advanced side and you add additional lines. So,
and can't you also do the actual percentages too for feed mode for the core, Paul?
Right. So if it's a variable voltage pump, so if it's a core or of our speed pump, so it's an Apex ready pump. So either one, all you got to do there is you can put the percentage that you want to have it run. So if you want to have it run 1, 2, 3%, right, you can just put if feed, A, B, C, or D, 000, then 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever you put the number there, 1, 2, or 3.
Ah, I got it.
Yeah. So,
perfect.
Does that help answer? And then that help answer your question?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's exactly what I was trying to figure out.
Great.
Awesome,
man.
man.
And one thing that's really cool, because we've been talking about DIY stuff, and one thing that's really cool too is you could get one of Harry's really cool IO breakout boxes attachments that he called in a little bit earlier about, and he makes these buttons. So then you can just push a physical button, right, and that's attached to A, B, C, or D, or anything else that you want to, and it would work pretty much exactly the same way with a little bit more programming. Okay.
Great.
Thanks so much for calling in, man. Thanks for calling, Michael, and go Lakers.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good day, Michael.
All right, take care.
You have a good day too. Thank you.
All right, you still there, Paul?
I am still here, Terrence. What's up?
How's your neck doing?
Yeah.
You need one of those little
some
sponge
days
things that you stick in the that like,
remember?
stick on the phone.
Yeah, like really.
He could just sit there. With the phone.
Before like the headsets were in vogue, right?
Yeah. Back when I could play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the phone. Those days.
Oh yeah. You just brought back a good memory for me.
It's a good show, man. I think that's gonna just about wrap it up for us.
Yeah.
I think we're going to do these, like I said, every 4 to 6 weeks. We're gonna do another call-in thing like this. It's fun. It mixes it up for everybody.
Fun.
And
go
ahead.
the only thing I wanted to say, I see like multiple numbers coming in now, right? People that want to call in too.
Yeah.
The big important. Yep. You have about the first half an hour of the show in which you can kind of get in the queue, guys. But after that, I can't. We can't.
Gotta do the
there's
show.
not multiple operators standing by, right?
Exactly. We're gonna have like a telethon behind us, right? I'm gonna walk up with my Gene Rayburn microphone, the long, skinny Gene Rayburn, and like, okay, who we got on the call now?
I think you're living a dream right now, aren't you? Yeah, I can see it.
I'm just living in the 70s and 80s, man. What do you want?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a great show, and we'll have another one of these in 2 weeks. Not with Colin, probably, but it will be. Well, that would be the 33rd. So there is no 33rd in May. So that's what, the 2nd of June, I guess, would be our next one. I know time is flying when you're,
it's flying,
locked
but
into
then
your
it
home.
seems like it's so slow. It's just all these different levels, right, of what's going on.
It's horrible.
So,
but I do want you to know that since you enjoyed that siren so much, I am going to find a way to punk you with the siren somewhere, and where it's just gonna be hidden somewhere in your office, and you won't know where, because it's kind of this non-directional sound when it goes off, and I'll just turn it on for just enough time for you to hear it, and then shut it off, and then you won't ever be able to find it. It'll just keep going off every once in a while.
So wait, you just to make clear, you're going to hide an Apex in my office.
No, you have.
Or you're going to hook it up to my, or you're going to hook it up to my system.
I'm going to hook it up to
think that
something.
I wouldn't notice.
Yes, I'm going to hook it up to something, but definitely had a good show. So next time, and then next week we should have another Control Freak Wednesday. So join us for that. Visit your local fish store. If they've got curbside, do it that way. If they're letting you in, help out the local fish stores all that you can. It's getting tough out there, and we'll see you very soon. Enjoy those fish, and we're enjoying the live streams. Take care, and Paul, you take care too, man. We'll see you soon. Okay.
You take care.